I'm Tamara Lane, and I'm a service manager here at CARS. And this is Module 7, the recovery team, planning, development, and facilitation. So the development of the recovery team and really the introduction of the concept of the recovery team should begin at that initial contact with your consumer. So you get a referral from CARS, you call the consumer, "Hi, I'm Joe Schmo from so-and-so agency. You were referred for CCS. I'd like to schedule a meeting to come out and tell you about CCS and make sure that it's something that you want to participate in. Where can we meet? What is a location that you would like to meet that's convenient for you?" So that means that consumers might not necessarily be coming to your office. And that's okay, because that's the way that CCS should work. If someone wants to meet you in the community, if they want to meet you at home, if they want you to meet them at a family member's home, that's okay, that's their choice. And you need to be open to that. What I recommend for each agency is that you build into your explanation of CCS and the CCS process the concept of the recovery team. So you're really just going to give a brief overview of what CCS looks like, what it is, what the process looks like, and you're going to want to mention that part of CCS is developing this recovery team of supports to help you accomplish your goals. And the recovery team is going to help support you in developing the individualized recovery plan, otherwise known as the IRP, and they're going to provide services and supports to you on that individualized recovery plan. So as I just said, and Jen in her earlier modules had touched on this, when you first meet a consumer, you are beginning the outreach process. So you are explaining what CCS is, because we have a tendency to get referrals from everywhere. And sometimes the individual helping with making the referral may not necessarily fully understand what CCS is. You are the experts. Once that case gets to you, it is your responsibility to go out and educate the consumer about what CCS is. It is a recovery-focused level of care. It is consumer-driven and strength-based. And it gives the consumer an opportunity to select from a menu of services that the consumer feels will best fit their needs in order to attain their personal goals. At that meeting, you also want to provide the CCS brochure and encourage the consumer to review it, because they really need to know what they're signing up for. Now, you don't have to use the language here. In fact, I wouldn't recommend using the language here because some of it is kind of up there, out there. Make sure that you use language that's appropriate for explaining CCS to your consumer. Some consumers, it's fine. You can use this language. Other consumers, you just may need to figure out a better way to explain it. Review the CCS process. And I don't know how much detail you actually want to get into on this unless the consumer has questions, but you really want to hit on the points. Listen, this is what CCS is, and this is what's part of it. I have you sign an admission agreement, and that starts our 30-day clock. So within that 30-day clock, we need to complete the mental health aorta functional screen. We need to complete the assessment to make sure that you're eligible for CCS. And then once you're found eligible for CCS, you're officially enrolled, and we can go ahead and create that individualized recovery plan and start providing services. Part of developing that individualized recovery plan is the development of that recovery team. So you don't need to get into a whole lot of detail in this process, because I really think as you move along in the enrollment process that you can get into a little more detail as you start to hit on those steps. But I think it's really good to have the consumer right off the bat start thinking about who do you want on your recovery team. You know, it's kind of like that life vision. It may be difficult for someone to go, oh yeah, I like my neighbor, my pastor on my recovery team. They may need to think about that. Now, some people may know right off the bat. So it just depends on the individual, but put that out there so that someone can start thinking about it. So as you've heard Jen and I and Lynn say numerous times, make sure that your consumer understands you have 30 days from the date that that application and admission agreement is signed to get the screen, the assessment, hold that recovery team meeting, and get that IRP developed. Now, there is the exception with the abbreviated assessment that if there's some initial immediate needs, and you really need to ask yourself what an immediate need is. Because I've seen in some of the case notes that I'm reviewing that right off the bat, the care coordinator was helping someone apply for SSIE. Now, that's a great intervention, and I think it'll be a great addition to any IRP, but does that need to be provided right away? Maybe. But unless there's a justifiable and immediate need for it, that can wait. That can wait till the IRP needs to be developed. Now, housing. Housing is a big one. Remember I said a lot of the CCS referrals coming in, that is an immediate need. That can be part of that abbreviated assessment. And that could be on your little mini IRP. Both of those documents are valid for a 3-month time period. Once that 3-month time period is done, you need to have your entire assessment completed, and you need to have an entire IRP completed. Okay, so you actually have to work on it during those 3 months to make sure that it's done before that clock expires. So that's just something to keep in mind. There is an exception to the 30-day rule, but in general, if there are no immediate needs, that 30-day clock starts from the signing of the application and the admission agreement. The recovery team. According to DHS 360324, the recovery team is a group of individuals who are identified to participate in an assessment of the needs of the consumer, services, service planning, and delivery, and evaluation of desired outcomes. So that is who your recovery team is. General description. So the recovery team approach utilizes a combined team of formal and informal supports, and we'll get into exactly what the difference is between those two. The recovery team is in place to assist the consumer in identifying their needs across their life domains, and this should tie back to the assessment, this should tie back to the screen. They assist in prioritizing those needs, and then they help develop the action steps and the strategies to support the consumer in attaining those goals and addressing their needs. And remember, the goals are to remove the barriers. So that is what the recovery team, they're going to develop strategies to help make that happen. So the other part that the recovery team is responsible for is committing to the various tasks that are designated on the IRP. Who is going to provide these services and supports? Members of the recovery team. So during the recovery team meeting, you're going to be eliciting commitment from those recovery team members, including the consumer. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. So really the whole concept of developing the recovery team, like the IRP, begins during the screening and assessing process, because that's really when you're starting to hear the consumer's story and getting a sense of who they are, what they need, where they've been. So during the screening and assessment process, what you're going to do is you're going to focus on building trust and building rapport with that consumer. Because without that, you really do not have a building block for all the rest of these steps. So that's really, really important. So being flexible, focusing on what the consumer needs instead of imprinting your own impressions, and just kind of sitting back, listening, doing some reflective listening, checking back in, making sure that your impression of what the consumer is identifying as being important is accurate. But really just focusing on building that trust and building that rapport. So during the screening and assessing process, you're also going to be listening for barriers and potential needs while the consumer is telling their story. You're identifying functional strengths. You're establishing that vision, or at least you're putting it out there. Because remember, some people need to think about that stuff. But you're still putting out the idea, hey, we need to create this overarching vision for you. Please think about it. Here are some questions. If you can maybe fill them out between the next time that we meet, this is going to be helpful to help us in the recovery planning process. At the same time, you're listening for what supports might currently exist. Does the consumer live with mom, and mom is incredibly supportive and does a lot of really great things? Does the consumer live with mom, and mom is a little overbearing and it's kind of intense for the consumer, and they really just want to get out on their own and do their own thing? So you're really listening for individuals that could potentially be a part of this recovery team. Ideally, and this is in a perfect world, and hopefully at some point, your recovery team may look like this. You want to have 50% formal supports and 50% informal or natural supports. Now, these are the must-haves on a recovery team. You must have the consumer. You must have yourself, the care coordinator, and a mental health professional. Now, if there is a substance abuse diagnosis, current or suspected, that substance abuse professional also needs to be part of the recovery team. And in previous modules, we had said that ideally the mental health professional and the substance abuse professional should be at recovery team meetings. Yes, that is ideal, but we recognize that some individuals serving in that role may also have roles that command a lot of their time as well. So if they cannot be present at that recovery team meeting, one, your supervisors need to really be thinking, is this an appropriate role for this individual? Do they have the time to commit to it? And two, if they're not there, there needs to be clinical consultation on an individualized recovery plan. It needs to be well documented in the treatment record by both you, the care coordinator, and that mental health professional. So the consumer is very, very much involved in developing their recovery team. So they are asked to participate in this process, and that is a requirement listed under 36 as well as in our policies and procedures. So this is kind of sad. A guy on his own tandem bike. But I think that this illustrates the recovery team perfectly, because your recovery team may start out pretty small for various reasons, but hopefully over time your recovery team is going to grow and the composition of it is going to change. So maybe, hopefully, ideally, in the future, that recovery team should be made up of that 50-50 split between formal and informal supports. So those informal supports, according to DHS 36, a natural support means a friend or another person available in the community who may assist consumers seeking stability and independence. Examples of formal versus informal natural supports. Formal supports consist of your traditional treatment team members. You've got your mental health professional, maybe your therapist, your employment specialist, child welfare, probation officers. Those are all formal, systematic supports that are there. Now, your informal natural supports can include relatives, friends, clergy, other members of the faith community, school personnel, or any other community members that a consumer identifies as being someone that's important to them, a significant other. So those are your informal supports. What a recovery team isn't, and this is really important because as the care coordinator, it is your responsibility to facilitate the recovery team meeting. So you need to make sure that the recovery team meeting does not turn into any of these things. You have to keep the team focused on what they're there to do. So a recovery team meeting is not a staffing with the client present. So you're not all talking about how Joe did this and Joe did that and we need to do this and Joe's sitting right there and not even included in the conversation. It is not a staffing. It is not crisis planning. So you're not meeting to come up with a plan to intervene. Now, things may come up during the recovery team meeting that are important, that may need addressing, that you're going to add to the IRP, but the focus of the recovery team meeting is not to intervene and address immediate crisis. That kind of goes on throughout the recovery planning process. And under DHS 36, we're actually not allowed to provide crisis services. Crisis services needs to be provided by individuals that are licensed to do so. So our crisis team, our mobile team. So if there's an immediate crisis, those are the individuals that need to be providing those services. And you can certainly be involved in connecting the consumer to those resources, but you are not doing immediate crisis intervention. Okay, you may be there for support. You may be doing your own assessment. But as far as crisis services, that needs to be provided by a licensed team. So this is kind of tricky because we talk about how our IRP really is like a wraparound approach. I mean, really, the IRP, when it was created, is pulled from a wraparound philosophy. However, the idea is not to simply just wrap services around a consumer. It's really to evoke the consumer's involvement in the planning process and to help bring in natural supports as well. So you are not identifying what needs to be wrapped around this client. You're really working in conjunction with them to figure out what they need. The recovery team meeting is not a place to do group or family therapy. So if Joe's mom comes in and they start arguing about X, Y, and Z, and it turns into this big fiasco about how this happened 20 years ago and you continue to do this, and you need to bring that back. And this may be a great opportunity to say, hey, Joe's mom, sounds like you guys could benefit with from some family therapy. Maybe that's something we could add to the recovery plan. What do you think about that? Is that something you might be interested in doing? So it's an opportunity to identify some potential for intervention, but let's not focus the session on trying to intervene and deal with interpersonal matters. Okay, so there's a science behind the recovery team meeting process. And this is really important for you guys to know, because care coordinators, like I said, are really facilitating this process. So it's important for you to know it, follow it, and be able to keep it on track when it's happening, because you want to have structure to your team meetings. If you just go in there without a plan and just, hey, let's see what happens, you might not get what you want accomplished. So this process is actually rooted in the wiser choice side of things with RSCs. So this approach to recovery team meeting facilitation, and when I show the video later in this module, it comes from the RSC process. Okay, so before you host a recovery team meeting, what I strongly suggest you do is come up with a written agenda. For all the operations meetings service managers host here, we have an agenda for every meeting that we run because it helps us stay focused. So I encourage you to set an agenda before every meeting and send it out to your recovery team members for review so that they know what to expect during the meeting, and maybe they want to add something, or maybe they think that maybe that's not as important, can we focus on this? So you really want to get feedback before you actually hold that meeting. So a general initial recovery team meeting agenda looks like this. You want to do your introductions. You want to set your ground rules. You want to explore strengths. Establish the vision statement, which actually should have been determined before we even get to this point. But you're really just reviewing it with the team, and they're going, okay, all right, we're all on the same page. Doing a needs assessment. So you're really adding to those barriers and those needs that were identified during the assessing and screening process. So you're just kind of checking back in, and then the recovery team will probably have more input into that. Same thing with prioritizing needs. This is very much a recovery team process, as everyone should be involved because all individuals may have various forms of feedback or input that could change the priority of those needs. Development of an action plan, and then getting commitment from those recovery team members to provide those services and supports indicated on the IRP. So as I indicated, create your agenda ahead of time, send it out to your recovery team members, and elicit feedback on that agenda before you host the meeting. So at the beginning of every meeting, in accordance with our policies and procedures and DHS 36, you need to explain the service planning process to everyone in the room. So that includes natural supports. So why are we here? We're here to work together to figure out what barriers are in place that are preventing the consumer from attaining their life vision, and we're here to develop supports and put services in place in order to try to remove those barriers. So really reviewing that process and why you're there. This is also very important. At your team meetings, the last page of the IRP, there's a lot of signature boxes. you're going to want to have a team roster signed at every meeting by every single recovery team member. And that includes listing their contact information and then making sure there's a signature as well. And then you're going to review confidentiality procedures as well. So what happens in this room stays in this room. It's not shared outside of the recovery team meeting without the consent of the consumer. So reviewing those two things. And I would say, so the roster, signing the roster is an absolute must at every team meeting. And I would also review those confidentiality procedures at the beginning of every meeting as well. As far as the service planning process, you may want to review that the first couple of meetings, but I think as the team gets it, you don't really need to repeat yourself. Okay, so during the introduction process, it's just that. You go around the room, hi, my name is this is my responsibility, or this is my role in the consumer's life, and this is why I'm here. You're going to want to set your ground rules. So be prepared to set your basic ground rules with the team. Examples: one person speaks at a time, the meeting will end on time, we all communicate in a respectful manner. So just very, very basic ground rules. And then, once you establish just the basic ground rules, open it up to the team. What other ground rules should we set for these meetings? You know, sometimes you may be working with an individual that comes to meetings under the influence. It's appropriate to say, you know, for the purpose of these recovery team meetings, we really need you to show up without using beforehand so that you can be focused and you can be part of this. So those are additional ground rules that you may need to set based on your team's needs and your consumer's needs. Strengths discovery. So remember, this starts during the screening and assessing process. It really continues into the recovery team meeting. And the whole idea is that you are really just trying to identify what those functional strengths are. So you may have an interpretation of what those strengths are, and you may be checking back in with some reflective listening during the assessment process with the consumer to make sure, you know, hey, do you identify this as being a strength of yours? But then when you bring that recovery team together, they may have more input, and they may have more ideas because they know that consumer in a different capacity. So you may elicit more strengths from this process than you did during the screening and assessment process. The really important thing, you're going to want to repeat this process during each recovery team meeting that you hold. Because ideally, as the recovery process moves forward, you are going to be building strengths, and strengths may change. So you really, really want to review and complete this process at every meeting. So that vision statement is established prior to the meeting, and it's reviewed with the team. So basically, you're checking in with the team and saying, hey, this is the vision. I want you to be aware of it. At that point, it doesn't really matter what the team members think, because this is the consumer's vision. You're basically just sharing that vision. The needs assessment, so this ties back to the screening and assessing process. You probably started this already, but this is just like functional strengths. You may have a perception of what's going on. The consumer may have a perception of what's going on, but then the recovery team can really add to this process because they may know different things, and they may have different ideas about what needs to be done to identify these barriers and overcome them. So this is very much a dialogue process, so you're conversing. you're talking about this as a team in a respectful manner. So that's your job as the care coordinator to make sure that that conversation stays focused and stays respectful and people aren't yelling over each other trying to get their opinions heard. So prioritizing needs is very much a team process as well, because a consumer may have an idea of what they want to work on and what's really important to them, but the recovery team members may bring some more information to the process or some ideas to the process that may change those priorities a little bit. For example, you'll see in this video, and maybe I'm not even going to go there because I'm just going to let you watch the video because it happens in the video and you'll get to see how those needs shift and the priority of those needs shift. Like I said with the IRP, people could have a lot of things they want to work on or that they need to work on that you find in the screening and assessment process. However, you don't want to overload people. We want to make things manageable. We want to help support success. So really try to focus on the top 4 things you want to work on. It can be less, but I would really cap it at 4 unless you have someone who is super ambitious and they really just want to shoot for the moon. That's okay. You can do that. But really try to focus on 4 or less. So the action plan, this is working together as a team to problem solve and brainstorm. Okay, these are our needs. These are our barriers. What are we going to do as a team to try to help remove these barriers? So what are the very, very specific strategies and interventions that are going to be put in place? So isn't this a beautiful process? And I can't tell you how many times as a case manager, and once again, I'm going to throw myself under the bus, I would sit there and I would write these plans. And it would be like, okay, what am I going to do? Oh, I need to figure this out. You have a team. This recovery team basically helps you write the IRP. So when this process is over, your job is to go back to the office and type it up. How beautiful is that? So like I said, this is a brainstorming process, dialogue. You're talking about what you need to put in place. And then once you determine what you need to do to support that consumer and what services need to be put in place, that's when you're going to review with the team and get commitment from the team members on who's going to do what. Important to note, the care coordinator and the consumer should not be doing everything on the plan. The idea of having a recovery team is to really spread those responsibilities out. Okay? So think about that. You know, a lot of our agencies right now, because we don't have the ancillary network in full operation where we want it to be, the care coordinators are providing a lot of those services. And that can be challenging, especially when you're responsible for the service facilitation, because we all know that can take a lot of time. So really looking within your agencies, outside your agencies, of services that are available for consumers that could really provide the additional supports that are needed, so that you don't have to be the hub of service facilitation and provide all of these services as well. You can do that, that's okay, but just keep that in mind. So everyone on the team should have a role on the IRP. The exception to that rule may be your mental health professional. Your mental health professional is just that. Now, your mental health professional may be providing some therapy to that consumer, so they may be on the IRP. However, if your mental health professional is your mental health professional and they're not providing direct services, they're serving as your supervisor, your consultant, then they don't necessarily need to be on the IRP. So I think that's where the exception lies. So at the end of the meeting, you want to make sure that all the recovery team members in attendance signed the plan, signed that signature page, because maybe someone wandered in late. You want to make sure that that's signed. You also want to make sure that if there's members of that recovery team that couldn't be present at that particular meeting, that they are listed below and indicated that they weren't present, but still the same thing. Their contact information needs to be listed. Everyone on that team needs to be listed regardless of attendance or not. The other thing you're going to want to do at the end of a meeting is schedule the next meeting. You've got the majority of the people in the room, if not all of the people in the room, so it makes perfect sense to sit there and look at your calendars and determine, hey, when are we going to get together next? Because we all know schedules fill up, we get busy, and then we go, oh, I forgot to schedule that meeting. I don't know how many of you have had consumers in our day treatment program, but the day treatment program, when they host their team meetings, they very much use a similar process. So we all sign in, and we all have feedback, and the consumer's there, and we all participate in this meeting. And then at the end of the meeting, we all pull out our schedule books, and we look at a time that works for everyone, and we schedule the next meeting. Very important. So our policies and procedures indicate that a recovery team meeting should be facilitated every 30 days or as needed. So that really offers flexibility. So I think that goes back to Zach's question earlier about how often should I host a recovery team meeting. And really, it's up to what you need. 30 days may not be enough time to really start to see some change and progress. And, some people may need a little more than 30 days to really get working on their goals and get engaged in their services. So this kind of leaves an open window. But, as I indicated, at least once every 6 months, this team needs to get together and develop that IRP and review that IRP. And in my opinion, I would think that you would want to host a recovery team meeting in between that time, because 6 months is a lot of time. But once again, that's the minimum requirement. Okay, now we are going to watch this process in action with a video.
I love my job. First and foremost, it's an opportunity to really help people see the best in themselves. And we all realize that we have struggles in our own life, and it's a good feeling to know that you're a part of helping that person get to a better place in life. There's 3 primary steps that happen before you actually sit your team down. That is the getting to know the client, establishing a vision with the client, as well as identifying potential team members. Hello, Letitia Little? Yes, this is Bernicia Banks. How are you? Yes, I will be a recovery support coordinator, and I wanted to know if I can come out and meet with you for a little bit. So the first step is making a phone call to the client, asking if they feel comfortable with you coming out meeting with them, or if they don't, where would they like that to occur? And then just really having a conversation with that client about what's gotten them to this point.
That I just had a daughter 2 months ago, and she was taken from me in the hospital. Someone called the state and informed that she tested positive for drugs. And I guess they felt that that was a reason to take her, that I had her in danger or things like that. And now I'm involved in the court system.
And all the while you're listening for what are the strengths. Even though they're telling you some pretty serious situations, all the trials that they've been through, your role is to listen for those strengths that they've presented throughout their life that's got them to this point, because they've done it this far without us. Even though it may not be the best, they've done it. And then identifying, okay, well, who was there for that individual throughout these different crises in their life.
My mom, she's really supportive. She takes care of my daughter, you got to think, because she's an older lady. Yeah. And she has this infant child, and she hasn't done this in a long time. So she takes her to all of her appointments. And my mom, she's working full time. So.
Okay. If you don't mind, one of the things that we really like to do is really identify the people who are there for you personally to be a part of your team. And I would love to have your mom at our first meeting to be your support system, as well as I'm quite sure she can give us a lot of wonderful ideas about what works with the family and what would be best for you. Would you be okay with us inviting her to the meeting?
Yeah, that's fine, because I've already told my mom that she...
And then being able to give that back to them before that interview is over to say, okay, this is what we're working with. This is where we're going to start. And how do you feel about us inviting these people to the table to help with this journey that you're about to take? A facilitator should really have a good outline, and the team should have an understanding of where we're going from point A to point Z. So really setting some of the basics in terms of what the expectations are of the team meeting. To prepare the agenda, this also happens prior to the actual team meeting. And what good facilitators focus on is really talking with the team members that are going to be present and getting a feel for what it is that they hope to get out of the team meeting. Setting the stage that these are the components that we want to address, but you really want to get a feel for what are some of the things that they need. Whether it's a systems need, if they're coming from various systems, or if it's a natural support, maybe family members may need something to happen for this client. You want to get a feel for that and then make that part of your agenda. It's very difficult to do your agendas in isolation, where you're the only person that has some say in what's going to happen in the team meeting. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We're here today to develop Letitia's single coordinated care plan. I'm Vernisha, and I am the recovery support coordinator. And of course, this is Letitia. Everyone knows Letitia. What I'd like for us to do is... The first step in the team meeting is to, of course, do introductions. Not to assume that everyone knows each other. And when you do your introductions, you want to make sure that people go around and not only give their names, but their roles and what their purpose for being at the team is today.
My name is Darcy, and I am Letitia's bureau worker. I'll be overseeing the safety of her child.
And my name is Lakeisha, and I'm Letitia's friend. I'm here for moral support.
Thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Kimberly. I'm the probation officer, and I will be overseeing Letitia's current probation order.
My name is Desiree. I'm Letitia's AOTA counselor, and I'll be working with her on her AOTA issues, a relapse prevention plan, and one-on-one counseling.
And I'm L'Oreal. I'm Letitia's mother. I'm here for moral support.
Well, thank you. And thank you all again for coming. What we're going to do first is we're actually going to set up some ground rules for our team meeting. And when I called you guys earlier, I thought about some of the things that we'll be talking about at the team meeting. And I've come up with 3 ground rules, just general ground rules. Okay, the first one is be respectful. One person speaks at a time. And then we're going to make sure that we end our meeting on time. The meeting should go no longer than an hour and a half. Is there anything else anybody would like to add to that list?
How about being open-minded?
Being open-minded, that's a really good one. I'm going to write this up here. Anything else?
I have one, respect others' opinion.
Respect others' opinions, very important. Thank you. The ground rules are standard for every team meeting. There are some general ground rules that all facilitators should go over. Depending on the individual, if there are certain issues that have come up in previous team meetings, for example, say a client comes to meetings under the influence or has on occasion, and you know that that's not a productive way to hold a meeting, there have been times when I've set ground rules to say that if this is to occur, this is what the team is going to do next. So while there's some standard ground rules, they really are very individualized to that particular client and maybe what your experience has been with that team in the past. first, you identify the strengths or do the strengths discovery, and you can do that in two pieces. You do that in your initial visit with the client, and then you revisit that once you have your team together to have other team members add to that process. I've already gathered a list of strengths that you can see in front of you. There's strengths about Letitia as well as some of you on the team. But now I want to go around and just have you tell me, what do you feel you bring to the table that's going to assist Letitia and her child in having a successful life?
I bring formal support. I'm going to help Letitia identify her triggers that she won't continue to relapse and go back into the same path that she did that got her here. And I'm also help Letitia put some services in place that will help benefit her and her family.
I will also bring formal support to help Letitia to move past this current probation order into being a productive citizen. And I bring flexibility and open-mindedness.
This is an ongoing process in terms of the strengths discovery. As your team gets to know the client better, as the client feels more comfortable, you're going to be able to add to your strengths list. And this should be repeated at every team meeting. Wow, we have a lot of strengths that we're going to be working with. And as you can see, we have a lot of strengths that Letitia also brings to the table. That will be developing as we get to know each other better and as we move on. The next step is to look at the vision and make sure that we're in agreement with the vision, recognizing that it's your vision, Letitia. But if there's anything anybody wants to add or feels that we need to change with the vision, let's talk about it so that we all know which direction we're going. Okay? The vision that Letitia came up with is, I would like to be reunited with my baby, moving forward and making positive steps toward sobriety. This is done primarily in that initial interview with the client, where the client lets us know what they want, where they'd like to see themselves in 6 months to a year, and again revisit it at the team meeting so that everybody is aware of where that client wants to be and has buy-in to that vision. Now what we're going to do is we're going to listen for some of the things you feel you need help with in order to move closer to your vision. What are some of those barriers? And those will all be included in those life domain areas, the areas of alcohol and drug, relationship, family. So all of those things that you feel you may need help with, let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about how we're going to put things in place to assist you.
Well, the biggest thing is I need to know what I need to do to get my daughter back. That's my main focus, is to know. I need it written out, outlined to me exactly what I have to do to get my daughter back.
Okay.
I need to try to stay out of jail with my probation officer, what she wants me to do, to follow those rules, and what I have to do to stay in this program, because this is a part of my conditions for probation.
Okay. Any other barriers that you foresee?
Not at this time. Just getting my daughter back. When I leave here, I want to go into transitional housing. I think that will help out a lot for me and my child, where I can go into some housing, because I don't have anywhere to go at this time. I can't live in a house with my daughter and my mother. And so housing is going to be a big thing, and I don't have a job.
Okay. The client is really the crux of the entire meeting, and their role is to help us to, first of all, understand what is it that they need from the team, and what interventions would be most helpful to them, as well as helping us establish who are the support people that they're going to want to be there for them after this whole process is over and done with. And then giving approval once we've mapped out a plan that, okay, this is something that I'm really willing and able to do. Is there anything anybody wants to add, other needs that you see?
Well, for Letitia to be able to work on getting her daughter back, one of the things is she needs to learn how to safely parent her child and be able to provide for her child.
Okay. Great. We also want to know from the other system partners and other team members, what is it that they feel needs to happen in order for that client to reach their vision? I've listed the 7 needs that we came up with, and now what we need to do is prioritize the needs so we know where we're going to start. I'm actually going to identify this last need, being clean and sober, as our first priority need, because we know that we have to make sure that that happens in order for everything else to fall in place. So I'm going to label that as number 1, if that's okay with you, Letitia. Okay? And then if you guys can talk to me about what you think should be first or second, third, and fourth, so we can prioritize the rest of them.
I think the second one should be parenting.
Parenting?
Yes.
Okay, does everybody agree with that?
Well, she doesn't have a baby yet. I got the baby. I have the baby, so.
I think I need to get a house. I need to be working on some housing because I'm going to get my baby back.
Yes, you are. But you need finances in order to pay for housing.
But the Wiser Choice program can pay like a couple of months of my rent. That's what I was told.
Well, right now you're in residential, so.
But I'm not going to be here long because I'm going to leave here in about 30 days or so. They said I only have to be here 60-day clean time, and then I can leave. That's what the bureau worker said, and I can get my baby back.
It sounds like the team is saying that it would be helpful if before you got the baby back, you worked on some ways to parent your child safely so that this doesn't happen again and you can get the bureau out of your life and we don't have to be back here in a few months. Do you agree that that's a need that would be something that would be helpful to address?
Well, the course, like I said, the course said I have to go through parenting, but I don't think I have any issues with parenting. I haven't used since I had my baby, and I said I wasn't going to use, so my parenting is not an issue, I don't think.
Again, because we get to prioritize at least 4 of the needs, would you guys be okay if we looked at the housing, and all of these we're kind of going to be working on together. So we just want to make sure we identify the top 4. If we looked at the housing, but also maybe put housing as number 2 and parenting as number 3, knowing that over the next 30 days we're really going to be working on all of those 4.
Let's put finances then as number 2 because she can't get a house unless she has finances.
Okay. Right. So are you okay with that, Letitia? Okay, so we will look at the finances as 2, and then once she's secure in her finances, we'll help her to get housing, and then we'll make sure that we add parenting before we move on to anything else. Yes. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we have our top 4 needs. Okay, and again, the other needs, we're not going to forget about them. We will come back to them in 30 days and then come up with strategies to address those. Again, we just don't want Letitia to be overwhelmed at this point. Okay? And then the final step is the action planning or the strategy component. And that's when you talk about very specifically who's going to do what, when, where, and how are they going to do it in order to help that client meet his needs to reach the vision. So starting with need number 1. What are some things that are going to be done to help her remain or get clean and sober?
Me and Letitia already met, so she has a schedule in place to attend the groups that she's attending now. Also, you have seen, I have faxed you her attendance record, and you see that she has missed many days, and that came up in our conversation, why she was absent from some of her groups. Letitia has been sick. She's struggling with dental problems right now, and she needs to go to an eye doctor to have an eye exam because she has trouble reading. So those are some of the problems. We also have set up a time where Letitia and myself is meeting once a week, doing one-on-one, and we're discussing personal issues.
Who here will be able to do set up her medical and dental appointment? Are you able to do that with your?
I'll be able to take her to her appointments and get her back.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Anything else related to her addressing her sobriety? The initial purpose is really just to allow your team to brainstorm anything and everything that they think would address a need. They can just throw it out there. Later on in that process, when you start looking at your strengths to see, okay, will this really work for this client, is where you may take out some or tweak another strategy in another way. Need number 3 is to help you find stable housing. So let's talk a little bit about what we can put in place to make that happen.
What I would like to see once housing is secured is that Letitia have a no contact order with Dad.
How can I not have a family with my daughter's father? How can he not be a part of her life?
Currently, at this point, I'm just asking for a no contact order because he's also listed as a co-defendant on your current charges. So that's something that we
all
can...
his charges was dropped. That case was on me. It's all dropped against him.
It sounds like there are some concerns with, what role he's going to play. What I suggest is that maybe what we can do is we can focus on the issue of helping you find housing first, and then maybe invite your boyfriend to the next meeting, and we can talk about some of the things that he may need to do in order for us to set up visitation and get him more involved in the team process.
Well, he's already visiting with me and the baby.
Okay, so that's not a concern at the point?
No,
at this
because we
point?
visit together now.
Okay. Would you mind then, Kim, if we, in terms of the discussion about no contact, we can gather more information about what's happened and why you would have some of those concerns?
Yes.
I really want to make sure we're able to get through these 4 points. And if we have him at the table, it'll be easier for us to get the whole picture.
Today, but he had a flat tire.
Okay, and that's fine. And next time we'll make sure we schedule a team meeting around his schedule. And if something comes up, we can just reschedule it or in a more convenient place.
That would be good.
Okay?
That's fine.
Okay, so going back to the housing, what is it again that we can do to help you to secure housing? When people get off task, you're able to bring those individuals back. And if people are not following the agenda, so to speak, you really have to be assertive in getting them back on board without making them feel as though you're shutting them down. Well, it looks like we have a really good plan in place. So the last thing that I want to do is to just go around and make sure that everybody's sure about what they're supposed to be doing and get some commitments. And then we'll just need to set another date for about 30 days or so to review our plan. Okay? So Lakeisha, you're going to be picking up job applications and taking them to Letitia, and you guys are going to go together and fill out some applications for CNA work. Mm-hmm. Desiree, you're going to be setting her up with her alcohol and drug treatment, individual as well as group, and you've also agreed to take her to her dental appointment and her eye appointment. Yes. Okay. I'd like to say that there are no two plans that should look alike, and the way that you create the best plans with clients is that you really highlight what their strengths are, what the team's strengths are, and any intervention that you put in place really needs to tie into that client's strengths. That's what's going to make it individualized. And you want to make sure that there's not one person that's responsible for everything. That's the client included. Even though it is his or her plan, they shouldn't be responsible for doing everything. As well as yourself, as a facilitator, you can't be responsible for everything. So by the time the plan is completed, you really want to set a standard that everybody at the table has a role and a responsibility. All right, then the only other thing that we need to do is set up a time for our next meeting, and it should be within 30 days. Before you leave any team meeting, you want to make sure that you set the date for the next team meeting. And that should be no more than 30 days out. The sole purpose is to have the consumer walk away with a plan for their current situation to help them reach whatever vision they've established for themselves.
I just want my daughter back and to be able to provide the best for her, and just to show everyone that I don't need to do drugs to maintain, that I can live a life without doing drugs. I've done it before, and so can her father, and that we can live together as a family and not do drugs.
Okay. So, the recovery team meeting in action. So did you see from that video how important of a role the care coordinator serves? And you really, really are keeping that meeting on task. So I hope that was a good illustration of everything we talked about. Okay, so one thing I want to mention while we were watching the video, what I forgot to mention in my presentation, when you are doing the strengths discovery, not only are you identifying what the consumer brings, but you are also identifying what you bring to the team as far as strengths go. So that's really, really important. So make sure that you include that in your recovery team process. So each team meeting, as was stated in the video, is unique. Each IRP that is created should be unique to the needs of that consumer. Be prepared to set up your agenda ahead of time and send it out to the recovery team members for review and elicit feedback if revisions need to be made. And if during the team meeting any sort of consumer bashing starts occurring, you really, really need to put a stop to that. You are the facilitator of this meeting. So you want to make sure that there's respectful communication, there's no bashing. The goal of this process is to empower the consumer. So keep that in mind. So as I've stated over and over, it is the care coordinator's responsibility to keep the recovery team meeting on track. Following the recovery team meeting, every person that was present at the meeting should write a case note related to their participation. I was at the meeting. This is what I covered. You can bill for that time. So you want to make sure that you enter a case note. Any questions? Monica.
I know it was mentioned that it was required to have the 6-month follow-up to update the plan every 6 months, but then it was suggested to have like monthly team meetings, I guess you could say. So my question is with the signature page. So, because I've seen even in like wraparound at the different meetings, it's a signature page that's not in the IRP. So for those meetings that aren't meant to update the IRP, should we have like a separate signature page for those meetings in between, or should we kind of bring like an IRP each time and just keep printing and updating that with each meeting?
So the question is, if you're hosting meetings more than the 6-month time frame, do you need to bring that signature page to serve as your attendance roster to each meeting? I would say yes, that you would want to bring that signature page, because my assumption would be that when you are pulling that recovery team together, there's going to be some changes that need to be made to the IRP. So it just makes perfect sense that you would have everyone sign off on that IRP that was changed. Because I can't really see you facilitating a recovery team meeting where there wouldn't be changes. Because there's got to be some sort of progress that's occurred or something that needs to be tweaked slightly. So I would recommend that you use that signature page as your roster. I know that it's done differently in other levels of care. However, that's what we have been recommending as far as keeping attendance.